There are moments in life where you know, with absolute certainty, that the universe has decided to personally punch you in the throat. For some men, it's a flat tire on the way to a job interview. For others, it's the "we need to talk" text from a girlfriend who has been acting distant for weeks. For me, it was the moment the Grand Warlock of the Shadow Realm had exactly one hit point left. My guild was screaming victory in my headset, and my screen went black. It wasn't a flicker. It wasn't a buffer. It wasn't the slow, agonizing crawl of a connection dying a natural death. It was a guillotine chop. Instant darkness. The connection lost error message popped up in red text that felt weirdly aggressive, mocking me in the reflection of my own horrified face. I sat there for 3 seconds, blinking. I could hear the silence of the house, the hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen, the distant whir of the AC unit, but the comforting, high-pitched whine of the fiber optic modem? Gone. "Hello?" I said into my headset, my voice echoing in the empty room. "Guys?" Nothing. I ripped the headset off and scrambled under my desk, checking the lights on the modem. The power light was green, steady, and mocking. But the WAN light, the lifeline to the outside world, the golden thread connecting me to civilization, my job, and the loot I had just lost, was blinking a furious, panic-inducing red. I did the standard dance. I unplugged it. I counted to 10. I counted to 30 just to be safe. I plugged it back in. I waited, holding my breath like I was defusing a bomb. Blink, blink, red. I stood up, dusting off my knees, and walked to the window. My office overlooks the side yard, a narrow strip of grass that serves as the demilitarized zone between my property and the sovereign nation of Brenda Stan. Brenda. Brenda is a woman who treats the Homeowners Association guidelines like the Geneva Convention, except she believes she's the prosecuting attorney and the judge. She's in her late 50s, wears floral print capris that are aggressively bright, and possesses a haircut that defies physics, a rigid helmet of blonde ambition that hasn't moved since 1998. I looked out the window, and there she was. She was standing in the flower bed that separates our driveways. It's technically my property, but there's an easement for utilities. And right there, protruding from the mulch like a bright orange snake, was the fiber optic cable the ISP had installed 3 months ago. They hadn't buried it deep enough. A temporary fix, they said, until the trenching crew could come out. It was visible, sure, but it was flagged. It was obvious. Brenda was holding a pair of heavy-duty hedge trimmers, the kind you use to decapitate small trees or, apparently, digital infrastructure. She wasn't looking at the hydrangeas. She wasn't looking at the weeds. She was looking down at the severed ends of an orange cable, a look of satisfied, smug accomplishment plastered across her face. I didn't walk to the front door. I sprinted. I tore open the front door and marched out into the humid July heat, socks on concrete, adrenaline pumping through my veins like I was about to fight a bear. "Brenda!" I shouted. She jumped, clutching the trimmers to her chest like pearls. She looked up at me, blinking behind her oversized sunglasses. "Oh, you startled me. You shouldn't sneak up on people when they're working with sharp tools." "Working?" I pointed a shaking finger at the ground. "Brenda, what did you do?" She followed my finger, looking at the severed orange cable as if seeing it for the first time. "Oh, that? I was just tidying up. The weeds were getting out of control, and this orange vine was choking the life out of the soil." "That is not a vine, Brenda. That is my internet. That is a fiber optic cable." She waved a hand dismissively, the trimmers snapping dangerously close to her ear. Well, it shouldn't be there. It's ugly. It clashes with the mulch. I thought it was some sort of construction debris left over from when you had that delivery last week. Honestly, you need to be more careful about leaving trash in the yard. I stared at her. I actually felt my brain rebooting, trying to process the sheer density of the ignorance standing before me. It's clearly marked, Brenda. There are little flags. Look, there is a flag right there that says, "Caution, buried cable." I pointed to the yellow flag she was currently standing on. She shifted her weight, covering the flag with her orthopedic sneaker. I don't have time to read every piece of litter that blows into the yard. Besides, if it was important, they would have buried it properly. It was a hazard. I could have tripped. You were gardening in the mulch. You don't walk in the mulch. I go where the weeds are, she said, lifting her chin. And now the weeds are gone. You should be thanking me. It looks much neater now. Thanking you? Brenda, I work from home. That cable is how I make my living. You just cut my income. She sniffed, adjusting her visor. Well, maybe you should get a real job that doesn't require playing on the computer all day. My nephew works at the bank. He wears a tie. He doesn't run around the yard in his socks yelling at his elders. She turned her back on me. She actually turned her back on me and started snipping at a perfectly innocent azalea bush. I stood there, mouth agape, the severed orange cable mocking me from the dirt. The clean cut reflected the sunlight. It wasn't an accident. You don't accidentally slice through a thick, shielded cable with hand trimmers. You have to gnaw at it. You have to want it. I pulled out my phone, 1 bar of 4G. Great. I dialed the ISP support number. I spent the next 45 minutes pacing my driveway, sweating through my t-shirt, listening to a jazz flute cover of Despacito, while a robotic voice assured me that my call was very important to them. Brenda continued to garden. She hummed. I think it was a hymn. She was humming a hymn while standing over the corpse of my bandwidth. Finally, a human voice crackled on the line. Thank you for calling Galactic Speed Internet. This is Kevin. How can I help you? Kevin, I said, my voice tight. I need a tech. Emergency. My line was cut. I'm sorry to hear that, sir. Let me run a diagnostic. You don't need a diagnostic, Kevin. The line is in 2 pieces. My neighbor executed it. Oh, Kevin said. That's physical damage. That's usually a billable service call. I don't care about the bill. I care about the when. When can you get someone out here? Keyboard clacking. The sound of my soul withering. Earliest availability for a line repair is, let's see, Tuesday. Tuesday? Kevin, it's Thursday. I can't work until Tuesday. It's a specialized crew, sir. If the line is severed, they have to re-splice or run a new drop. It's not just a plug-and-play situation. Kevin, please. I will name my firstborn child Kevin. Just get someone out here sooner. Let me see if I can flag it as a hazard, he whispered, like a co-conspirator. Exposed wires. Trip hazard. Okay. I might be able to get a contractor out there tomorrow just to assess. But no promises on the fix. I'll take it. I hung up. Brenda was gone. She had retreated into her house, probably to bake cookies with the souls of the innocent. The next morning, a white van with a logo I didn't recognize pulled up. A guy hopped out. He was huge. He looked like he ate wrenches for breakfast. His name tag said Big Mike. Not really, it said Mike, but he was definitely a Big Mike. He wore a neon vest and a look of permanent exhaustion. I walked out to meet him. Please tell me you can fix it. Mike looked at the ground. He squatted. He picked up the 2 ends of the orange cable. He looked at the cut. He looked at me. This is clean, he said. His voice sounded like gravel in a blender. This wasn't a lawnmower. Lawnmower chews it up. This was shears. It was Brenda, I said, pointing at her house. Mike sighed, standing up and wiping his hands on his pants. Neighbor dispute? I hate these. Look, buddy, here's the deal. Since this is a temporary drop that wasn't buried to code yet, and it was vandalized, I can't just splice it. Company policy says if I splice a temp line that's been tampered with, I own the liability if it fails again. So? So I have to put in a work order for a trenching crew. We gotta bury a conduit. We gotta do it right so she can't get to it again. Okay, do that. How long? Mike scratched his beard. Permits takes 3 days. Scheduling takes a week. Crew is backed up because of the storm last week. You're looking at 3 weeks. Maybe 4. 4 weeks. I felt the blood drain from my face. Mike, I can't go 4 weeks without internet. I'll lose my job. I'll lose my mind. I'll have to read books, Mike. Paper books. Sorry. Man, I can give you a hotspot box, but the speeds are going to be trash out here. Just then, the front door of Brenda's house opened. She stepped out, wearing a visor and holding a cup of tea. She walked right up to the property line, smiling that tight, venomous smile. Is there a problem, officer? She asked Mike. Mike looked at her. I'm not a cop, ma'am. I'm the cable guy. Well, you're blocking my view of the street, and your truck is leaking oil. It's water from the AC, lady, Mike grunted. Brenda, I snapped. Mike says it's going to take a month to fix the line you cut. A month! She took a sip of her tea, pinky extended. Well, that sounds like a wonderful opportunity for a digital detox. You know, radiation from those Wi-Fi things is terrible for your skin. I did you a favor. You destroyed utility property, Mike said, his patience visibly thinning. That's a federal offense, technically. Tampering with communications infrastructure. Brenda laughed. It was a dry, brittle sound. Oh, please. It was a weed. I was gardening on my property line. If you people wouldn't leave your trash in my yard, this wouldn't happen. She looked at me. Maybe now you can paint your front door. That blue is fading. It looks lower class. Something snapped in me. It wasn't the insult about the door. It wasn't even the loss of the internet. It was the absolute, unwavering certainty that she believed she had won. She believed she controlled the space, the air, and the aesthetic of the entire neighborhood. She believed that because she was the president of the garden club and the self-appointed queen of the cul-de-sac, the laws of physics and property did not apply to her. She turned to walk away. Have a nice day, boys. Try to keep the noise down. Mike watched her go. He turned to me. I can rush the permit, he offered, his voice softer now. Maybe get it down to 2 weeks. But she's going to be a problem. If I dig, she's going to call the city. She's going to stand over the crew. Don't worry about the permit, Mike, I said, my voice sounding strangely calm. Put the order in. Do it by the book. Take your time. Mike frowned. You sure? You seemed pretty desperate a minute ago. I was, I said. I looked at the severed cable, then at Brenda's pristine, manicured garage door. But now I have a project. A project? Mike, you know anything about radios? Radios? Like CB? No, I said, a slow, dark smile spreading across my face. Like ham, amateur radio, high frequency, high power. Mike grinned. It was a scary grin. My brother is a ham. He's got a tower in his yard that looks like the Eiffel Tower. His neighbors hate it. Is it legal? Oh yeah, Mike chuckled. Federal law. PRB 1. The HOA can't say squat. If you have a license, you are practically a federal installation. I looked at Brenda's house. I looked at her garage door. I remembered reading somewhere, a Reddit thread maybe, or a tech forum, about the Frequencies of older garage door openers. Unshielded. Vulnerable. "Mike," I said, "how fast can I get a license?" "Crash course? Weekend. Why?" "Because Brenda thinks she controls the lines of communication," I said, kicking the dirt over the dead orange cable. "I think it's time I introduced her to the electromagnetic spectrum." Mike clapped a heavy hand on my shoulder. "I like you, kid. I'll leave the hotspot. It's crap, but it'll let you browse Amazon. You're gonna need to order some parts." He got in his truck. As he drove away, I didn't go back inside to mourn my connection. I stood in the driveway, staring at the empty space between our houses. It was about 20 feet wide. Plenty of room. Brenda poked her head out of her window. "Is he gone?" "Good, now go mow your lawn." "I will, Brenda," I shouted back, waving cheerfully. "I'm going to do a lot of landscaping. You're going to love it." She slammed her window shut. I walked back inside, connected my phone to my laptop, and watched the loading bar crawl across the screen. I wasn't loading a game. I wasn't loading Netflix. I typed 3 words into the search bar. Amateur Radio License Study Guide. The internet was down. The game was lost. But the war? The war had just begun. And unlike Brenda, I wasn't armed with hedge trimmers. I was about to be armed with the Federal Communications Commission and 1,500 watts of pure, spite-fueled transmission power. She wanted to cut the line? Fine. We'll go wireless. Living on a mobile hotspot provided by a cable company is a special kind of purgatory. It's not quite hell. Hell would be no internet at all. But it's close. It's the waiting room of the afterlife, where everything buffers, images load like it's 1999, and trying to send an email with an attachment feels like trying to push a watermelon through a garden hose. For the next 3 days, I existed in a pixelated haze. My boss, a man named Gary, who thinks the cloud is literal weather, was surprisingly understanding when I told him my neighbor had vandalized the infrastructure. "Take the week to get set up," Gary had said, his voice cracking over a Zoom call that made him look like a Minecraft character. "Just don't let it impact the Q3 deliverables." "It won't, Gary," I lied. "It absolutely would." I spent those 3 days sitting in my home office, staring out the window at Brenda. She was living her best life. She was pruning. She was sweeping her driveway. Why do people sweep concrete? And she was holding court with the other neighbors, probably telling them how she saved the neighborhood from the tyranny of my ugly orange cable. Every time her garage door opened, whir, clunk, it was a taunt. That sound, that generic chain drive rattle. It was the sound of her freedom. She could come and go. I was trapped in 480p resolution. I needed a weapon. Not a physical one. I looked terrible in orange jumpsuits. But a bureaucratic one. A loophole. A rule so obscure and powerful that it would make the Homeowners Association bylaws look like a suggestion box. I started digging. I tethered my phone to my laptop at 2:00 a.m., the only time the cellular network wasn't congested, and I went down the rabbit hole. I searched for property rights, easement laws, and suing neighbors for emotional distress caused by hedge trimmers. Most of it was useless. Small claims court would just get me the cost of the repair, which the ISP was already going to bill her for eventually. I didn't want money. I wanted vengeance. I wanted to take something she loved, her pristine, control-freak view of the world, and shatter it. Then, I found it. It was buried in a forum for radio enthusiasts, a thread titled, "HOA trying to ban my antenna. Help?" The top comment was a link to a piece of federal legislation. PRB 1. I clicked it. The text loaded slowly, line by agonized line, but when it did, angels sang. State and local regulations that operate to preclude amateur radio communications are in direct conflict with federal objectives and must be preempted. I reread it. Then I read it again. Basically, the FCC, Federal Communications Commission, had declared that amateur radio, ham radio, was a vital service for emergency communications. Because of this, local governments and, by extension, HOAs could not ban amateur radio towers outright. They had to make reasonable accommodations. Reasonable accommodations, I whispered to the empty room. I looked up the specific HOA covenants for our neighborhood. Section 4.2. No external antennas or satellite dishes larger than 18 inches. Then I looked back at PRB 1. Federal law, HOA covenants. If I became a federally licensed amateur radio operator, the HOA couldn't stop me from putting up an antenna. And not just a small one. To talk to people around the world, I would need a big antenna. A tower, a structure that would be legally protected by the United States government. A structure that would be located exactly 3 feet from Brenda's precious hydrangeas. My heart started racing. This was good. This was put a 50-foot metal spike in the backyard, good. But it wasn't enough. An eyesore was a passive attack. I needed an active one. I needed something that would disrupt her life the way she had disrupted mine. I kept reading. I fell into the technical specifications of radio frequencies. I learned about bands, wavelengths, and interference. And then I stumbled upon the Part 15 rule. In the world of radio, there are 2 types of devices, licensed and unlicensed. I, if I got my license, would be a Part 97 station. I would have a call sign. I would have rights. I would be a master of the airwaves. Brenda's garage door opener? That was a Part 15 device. I looked up the make and model of the opener she used. It was an older unit, a Genie screw drive from the mid-2000s. I found the manual online. Operating frequency, 315 MHz, or 390 MHz. I cross-referenced this with the amateur radio band plan. 315 MHz is smack in the middle of a government band, but 390 MHz. That's right next to the 70-centimeter amateur band, 420 to 450 MHz. And more importantly, the receiver circuits in those old garage door openers are wide. They are cheap. They listen for a specific signal, but if there is a massive amount of RF, radio frequency energy nearby, even if it's not on the exact frequency, the receiver gets overwhelmed. It's called desensitization, or front-end overload. Basically, if I was transmitting high power near her house, her garage door opener would go deaf. It wouldn't hear her remote. It simply wouldn't work. And the best part? The legal disclaimer on every Part 15 device, stamped right on the back of her remote. This device must accept any interference received, including interference that may cause undesired operation. Must. Accept. A slow, maniacal grin spread across my face. It was the grin of a Bond villain who just realized the laser beam actually works. If I set up a station and transmitted legally, and her garage door stopped working, that was her problem. The law literally said she had to suck it up. I looked at the clock. It was 4:30 a.m. "Okay," I said, cracking my knuckles. "Time to go to school." The next 4 days were a blur of caffeine and electromagnetism. I had to get licensed. You can't just buy a radio and start blasting. That's illegal, and the FCC has vans that will hunt you down. I needed to be legit. I needed to be untouchable. I downloaded a study app called Ham Study. I needed to pass 2 exams, the technician class, entry level, and the general class, which unlocks the high-power, long-distance frequencies. I didn't just study. I absorbed. I stopped being a human being and became a vessel for radio theory. I learned Ohm's law, V, X, R. I learned about standing wave ratios, SWR. I learned that the ionosphere reflects radio waves, which is how you talk to Japan on a wire strung between trees. I learned that Q codes are a thing. QTH means location. QSL means acknowledge. QRM means man-made interference. QRM, I thought. I am going to be the Count of Monte QRM. I memorized frequency bands. 80 meters, 40 meters, 20 meters. I learned the phonetic alphabet. Alpha, Bravo, Charlie, Delta, Brenda, Kilo, Karen. I was driven by a fuel source cleaner and more potent than nuclear energy. Pure, unadulterated spite. Every time I got a question wrong on the practice test, I looked out the window at Brenda's house. I watched her perfectly manicured lawn. I watched her walk to her mailbox, checking for letters she could probably complain about. "You think you won," I muttered, aggressively tapping the answer to a question about impedance matching. "You think the orange wire was the end. The orange wire was the prologue, Brenda." By Saturday morning, I was passing the practice exams with 98% accuracy. I knew more about dipole antennas than I did about my own family history. I found a testing session. It was being held on Sunday morning at the local VFW hall, hosted by the Tri-County Amateur Radio Club. I showed up at 8:45 a.m. The room was filled with folding chairs and the smell of stale coffee and donuts. The demographic was exactly what you'd expect. Men in their 60s and 70s, wearing vests with call signs embroidered on them, holding clipboards, and looking very serious about radio. I walked in, a 20-something guy running on 3 hours of sleep and an overdose of Red Bull, wearing a hoodie and jeans. A nice old guy named Walt, call sign W3ALT, clever, greeted me at the door. "Here for the technician exam, son?" Walt asked, adjusting his glasses. "Technician and general," I said, my voice steady. Walt raised an eyebrow. "Going for the doubleheader? Ambitious. You a maker? Into drones?" "Emergency preparedness," I said. It was the magic phrase. "Good man," Walt nodded approvingly. "Can never be too prepared. World's getting crazy." He handed me a bubble sheet and a pencil. I sat down at a folding table across from a guy who looked like he had invented the vacuum tube. The test began. It was a slaughter. I didn't just answer the questions, I attacked them. What is the maximum power output for a technician class operator on the 2-meter band? 1500 watts, PEP. Boom. What is the purpose of a repeater offset? To separate transmit and receive frequencies. Done. I finished the technician exam in 12 minutes. I walked up to the examiners. They graded it with a plastic overlay template. 35 out of 35, Walt said, smiling. Perfect score. You want to try the general? Hit me, I said. The general exam was harder. It involved more math, more regulatory nuance, and deeper theory about wave propagation. But I had Brenda. Every time I hesitated on a question, I visualized her face when the ISP guy told her he couldn't fix it for 3 weeks. The answer would materialize in my mind, summoned by the ghost of my dead internet connection. 20 minutes later, I handed the second sheet to Walt. The 3 examiners huddled around. There was some murmuring, a nod. Walt looked up, beaming. Well, son, you missed one question on the rules regarding maritime mobile operation, but you passed. Welcome to the hobby. He shook my hand. It felt like I was being inducted into a secret society. You'll get your call sign in the FCC database by Tuesday, Walt said. Then you can get on the air. Thanks, Walt, I said. I really appreciate it. What kind of rig you planning to set up? Another examiner asked. Handheld? Little wire in the attic? I paused at the door. I looked back at the room full of nice, helpful hobbyists who just wanted to talk to people in Ireland about the weather. I'm thinking a tower, I said. A big one. Directional Yagi array. High gain. Walt whistled. Serious business. You got room for that? Oh, I'll make room, I said. My neighbor loves architecture. I drove home, the high of the victory vibrating in my chest. I had the license, technically. I had the knowledge. Now I needed the hardware. I got back to my house and checked the hotspot. Still slow, still garbage, but it didn't matter anymore. I went to my banking app. I moved some money from savings. This was going to cost a few grand, but honestly, cheaper than therapy. I went to a website called DX Engineering. It's like the candy store for radio nerds. I started adding items to the cart. Item 1, 40-foot telescoping aluminum mast. Item 2, concrete base plate. Item 3, high-gain tri-band Yagi antenna. This thing looks like a giant metal skeleton fish. Item 4, 100-foot coil of LMR 400 coax cable, thick as a garden hose, shielded like a tank. Item 5, Yaesu FT991A all-mode transceiver. The radio itself. It looked like the cockpit of a fighter jet. I hit checkout. Then I went to Amazon and ordered a framed copy of the United States Constitution and a printed copy of FCC Regulation PRB-1. I was just closing my laptop when I saw movement outside. Brenda was in her driveway. She was talking to a contractor, a landscaper by the looks of it. She was pointing at the strip of land where the orange cable used to be. She was making chopping motions with her hand. I opened the window. Just a crack. And I want you to plant bamboo here, she was saying. Something tall, to block the view of that house. Bamboo. Invasive, fast-growing bamboo. She was going to try to wall me off. I almost laughed out loud. Bamboo? Brenda, I whispered to the glass. You're worried about a plant wall? I'm about to drop the Eiffel Tower on your head. I walked to the kitchen and made a sandwich. The silence of the house didn't bother me anymore. The lack of internet didn't bother me. Because I knew something she didn't. I wasn't just a neighbor anymore. I was station call sign KC1FU. Okay, I hoped that wouldn't be it, but a man can dream. I was a federal station, and Big Mike, the contractor, was coming back. Not to fix the cable, but to dig a hole. A very, very deep hole. Tuesday arrived with the kind of ominous, heavy heat that usually precedes a tornado or a really bad family reunion. I woke up at 6 o'clock a.m., not because of an alarm, but because of a notification on my phone. FCC Universal Licensing System. Application granted. Call sign KN4RDD. KN4RDD. It sounded like a droid from Star Wars. It was beautiful. It was my shield. It was my sword. I was no longer just a guy who lost a ranked match. I was a federally licensed operator of the amateur service. I walked to the window. The sun was just hitting Brenda's roof. Her house was silent. The enemy was sleeping, unaware that the Manhattan Project of petty revenge was about to break ground 10 feet from her prize-winning petunias. I picked up the phone and dialed the number on the business Anschluss. Card Big Mike had left me. It rang twice. Yeah? A voice like a cement mixer answered. Mike, it's the guy with the cut cable. The one with the neighbor. Oh, hey. You get that permit for the trench yet? I told you, city takes forever. Forget the trench, Mike, I said, sipping my coffee. I need a different kind of hole. I need a footer. 4 feet deep, 3 feet wide. Concrete. Rebar. There was a pause. I could hear him lighting a cigarette. That's a big hole, kid. What are you planting? A redwood? A tower, Mike. A 40-foot aluminum lattice tower. Self-supporting. Silence. Then a low chuckle that built into a full-blown belly laugh. You actually did it? You're doing the radio thing? I have the license, Mike. I have the federal law on my side. I just need a guy with an excavator who isn't afraid of a screaming woman in floral caprice. Kid, Mike said. I've been divorced 3 times. Screaming women are my ambient noise. I'll be there in an hour. True to his word, at 8 o'clock a.m. sharp, a rumble shook the foundation of my house. It wasn't a normal truck. It was a Ford F-350 that had clearly seen combat. The paint was a patchwork of primer, rust, and what might have been dried mud from the Clinton administration. It was towing a trailer with a mini excavator, a bobcat strapped to it. Mike hopped out. He was wearing the same neon vest, but today he had added a pair of mirrored aviator sunglasses that made him look like a construction-themed cop. I met him in the driveway. Morning, Mike. He looked at the space between the houses. He looked at Brenda's window. He looked at me. You want it where? Right there, I said, pointing to a spot exactly 3 feet from the property line. Legally, I have to be 5 feet off the easement. That puts the base right here. The guy wires will anchor here, here, and here. Mike walked over to the spot. He stomped his boot on the grass. This is going to be tight. You know she's going to lose her mind, right? The swing on the excavator is going to be inches from her fence. I trust you, Mike. You're a professional. I'm a professional instigator, he corrected. Let's get the permit posted. I handed him the permit I had pulled online from the county, expedited, thanks to a safety structure loophole. Mike took a wooden stake, stapled the bright yellow paper to it, and hammered it into the ground with the flat side of a shovel. Whack, whack, whack. The sound was like a dinner bell for demons. Within 30 seconds, the blinds in Brenda's house snapped open. A moment later, her front door flew open. She didn't walk. She marched. She was wearing a silk bathrobe and slippers, her hair in curlers. She looked like a disturbed owl. "What is this?" she screeched. "What is that noise? What is that truck?" Mike leaned on his shovel, chewing on a toothpick. He didn't even look at her. He looked at me. "So, you want the rebar cage pre-assembled, or should we weld it in the hole?" "Excuse me!" Brenda yelled, stepping onto the grass. "I am talking to you. You cannot park that monstrosity here. This is a residential neighborhood, not a construction site." I turned to her, putting on my best customer service smile. "Good morning, Brenda. Lovely day for a project, isn't it?" "What project?" She pointed a trembling finger at the yellow stake. She squinted at it. "Permit? Permit for what? You fixing the cable?" "Oh, no," I said. "The cable is a long-term issue, thanks to the incident. No, this is for my new hobby. Since I can't use the internet, I've decided to get into amateur radio. For safety. Emergency preparedness." "Radio?" She looked at the stake, then at the small patch of grass. Like a little antenna? Like a TV thing? Something like that, I said vaguely. Well, I don't like it, she sniffed. It better not be ugly. And tell this man to move his truck. It's blocking the mail carrier's line of sight. The truck stays, ma'am, Mike said, finally acknowledging her. His voice was deep, resonant, and completely devoid of fear. Need it for the equipment. I'm calling the HOA, she threatened, clutching her robe. You do that, Brenda, I said. Tell them it's a PRB1 protected structure. They'll know what that means. They wouldn't, but it sounded good. She huffed, spun around on her slippered heel, and stormed back inside. Mike watched her go. She's a pistol, ain't she? She cut my internet, Mike. She cut it with a smile. Mike nodded solemnly. He walked to the excavator. Stand back, kid. I'm gonna make a mess. The next 4 hours were a symphony of destruction. If you have never seen a mini excavator work in a small suburban side yard, it is a terrifying and beautiful thing. Mike operated the machine with the precision of a brain surgeon. The bucket clawed into the earth, ripping up the sod, the clay, and the roots. He piled the dirt into a mound that spilled slightly over the invisible property line. Not enough to be a violation, but enough that a few clods of clay rolled onto Brenda's pristine mulch. Every 20 minutes, Brenda would appear at her window, phone in hand. She was taking pictures. She was probably calling the police, the FBI, and the Pope. Around noon, a city code enforcement officer showed up. A guy named Steve. Steve looked like he wanted to be anywhere else. Complaint about an illegal excavation, Steve said, holding a clipboard. I handed him the permit and my FCC license. Steve looked at the permit. He looked at the hole. He looked at Mike, who was eating a sandwich while sitting in the excavator bucket. It's an antenna tower? Steve asked. Amateur radio, I corrected. Federal service. Steve sighed. Yeah, we got a memo about you guys. Can't touch you. Just try to keep the dirt on your side, okay? She's called the office 6 times. Will do, Steve. Steve left. Brenda watched him leave from her window. I waved at her. She didn't wave back. By 2:00 p.m., the hole was done. It was a gaping maw in the earth, 4 feet deep and 3 feet wide. Concrete truck is 10 minutes out, Mike said, checking his phone. A whole truck? We need 3 yards, plus I ordered extra. We can make a nice little patio for the base while we're at it. When the concrete mixer arrived, it was the turning point. A cement mixer is loud. It beeps when it backs up. It churns. It groans. The driver backed the truck up my driveway. The chute swung out. Brenda came out again. This time she was dressed. Jeans and a polo shirt. Her "let me speak to the manager" uniform. This is unacceptable, she shouted over the roar of the mixer. The fumes, the noise, my hydrangeas are vibrating. It's just concrete, lady, the driver yelled back. Be done in 20 minutes. I am on the board of the Homeowners Association, she screamed. You do not have approval for this. Architectural Control Committee guidelines clearly state that no permanent structures. I walked over to her, holding a binder. I had prepared for this. Actually, Brenda, I said, shouting to be heard over the churn, churn, churn of the truck. I have the text of the FCC ruling right here. State and local regulations that preclude amateur radio communications are in direct conflict with federal law. That includes the HOA. You can't stop it. If you try, you're violating my civil rights. Civil rights? She laughed. It's a ugly pole in the yard. It's not a civil right. It's national security, Brenda, I yelled, improvising wildly. What if the grid goes down? What if there's a zombie apocalypse? Who is going to coordinate the supply drops? Me! That's who! She stared at me. She looked at Mike, who was guiding the chute. She looked at the wet gray sludge pouring into the hole. You are insane, she said. You are absolutely insane. I'm just a hobbyist, I chirped. She stormed off again, but this time she got in her car. She backed out of the garage. I watched her go. Where's she going? Mike asked, wiping sweat from his forehead. Probably to the HOA management office, or to buy a gun. Well, let's get this steel set before she gets back. We lowered the base plate into the wet concrete. It was heavy steel, with 4 massive bolts sticking up. This was the anchor. Once this concrete cured, that tower wasn't moving for anything less than a direct nuclear strike. Mike leveled it with a laser level. He checked it twice. Perfect, he said. Dead plumb. We smoothed the concrete. Mike even used a hand trowel to etch 73, ham code for best regards, into the wet cement. Now we wait, Mike said. Cure time is 48 hours. Then we bolt the tower sections on. 2 days. I looked at the drying mud. Can we speed it up? You want this thing to fall on her house? No. We wait. Let her stew. The next 2 days were a cold war. The hole was there. The concrete pad was there, curing under a tarp. The yard looked like a crime scene. Brenda wouldn't look at me. When she checked her mail, she used her peripheral vision to avoid acknowledging my existence. But I saw the activity. A black sedan from the HOA management company drove by slowly. The driver took notes. A police car rolled by, slowed down, saw the permit, and kept going. She was trying. She was pulling every lever she had. But the federal government is a heavy doorstop. On Friday morning, the delivery truck arrived. It was a flatbed. It was carrying the tower sections. Shiny, aircraft-grade aluminum, triangular lattice, 10-foot sections. Brenda was in her driveway washing her car. She stopped. She dropped the sponge. Mike arrived 10 minutes later with 2 other guys. They looked like linebackers. It's showtime, Mike grinned. The assembly was fast. It was like an erector set from hell. Section 1, bolted to the concrete. Section 2, lifted up by Mike's excavator and bolted to the first. Section 3. As it went up, the shadow grew. 10 feet. It peeked over the fence. 20 feet. It was visible from the street. 30 feet. It was looming over Brenda's garage. 40 feet. It was majestic. It was terrible. It was a silver needle stitching the sky. Mike climbed to the top with a safety harness to mount the antenna. The antenna itself was a beam, a horizontal array of aluminum elements that was 8 feet wide. It looked like a giant TV antenna on steroids. Point it where? Mike yelled down. I looked at my compass app. Northeast, toward Europe. Northeast it is. He clamped it down. The northeast path happened to point directly through the airspace above Brenda's garage roof. Purely coincidental, of course. That was just where Europe was. Mike climbed down. The crew packed up. The tower stood silent, gleaming in the midday sun. I stood at the base, looking up. It was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. It was a monument to pettiness. Brenda came out. She didn't scream this time. She walked slowly to the property line. She looked up at the 40-foot spire casting a long, dark shadow across her prized hydrangea bed. The sun was blocked. Her flowers were now in the shade. She looked at me. Her face was pale. Her lips were a thin line. "You," she whispered, "you have ruined the neighborhood. Property values will plummet. No one will want to live next to a radio station." "It's for safety, Brenda," I said, patting the cold aluminum leg of the tower. "And besides, I think it adds a certain industrial chic, don't you?" "I am going to sue you," she hissed. "I am going to sue you for every penny you have. I will have this torn down." "You can try," I said. "But be careful. PRB-1 is very specific about harassment of federally licensed operators." She stared at the tower one last time, as if trying to melt it with her mind. Then she turned and walked into her house. I waited. Whir clunk. Her garage door closed. "Enjoy it while it lasts, Brenda," I murmured. Mike walked up, wiping grease off his hands with a rag. "She took it well," he joked. "She's reloading," I said. "But so am I." Mike gestured to the tower. "So, you gonna hook it up? Or is it just a lawn ornament?" "Oh, I'm hooking it up," I said. "I've got the coax cable right here. I'm drilling through the wall into my office tonight." "What kind of power you running?" Mike asked. "Legal limit," I said. 1,500 watts. Mike let out a low whistle. 1,500 watts? That's enough to cook a frozen burrito at 50 paces. You sure you know what you're doing?" "Mike," I said, looking at Brenda's closed garage door, "I have never been more sure of anything in my life." "All right," Mike said. "That'll be $4,000. Cash or check?" "Check," I said. "Worth every penny." I paid him. He loaded up the excavator. The F-350 rumbled to life, belching a cloud of black smoke that drifted, quite accidentally, toward Brenda's open bedroom window. "Call me if you need to dig a moat next," Mike yelled out the window. "I'll keep it in mind." I was left alone with my tower. I walked inside. I had the radio on my desk. The FT-991A. It was glowing with potential. I had the coax cable. I had the license. And I had Brenda's schedule. Bridge club on Tuesdays and Thursdays. Grocery shopping on Saturdays at 10 o'clock a.m. Tomorrow was Saturday. I sat down at my desk. I picked up the microphone. It felt heavy, significant. I wasn't just a guy with a grudge anymore. I was a force of nature. I looked at the frequency display. I tuned it. I wasn't jamming her. I would never jam her. That would be illegal. I was simply going to engage in some very enthusiastic high-power testing of my equipment. On a frequency that was adjacent to her garage door, strictly for scientific purposes. The internet was still down. I still couldn't play my game. But tomorrow? Tomorrow I was going to play a new game. And the controller was a push-to-talk button. Friday night was dedicated to the art of connectivity. I wasn't connecting to the internet. That was still a dead, severed limb in the front yard. But I was connecting to the ether. I drilled a hole through the exterior wall of my office. It felt sacrilegious to drill into the siding, but then I remembered Brenda's hedge trimmers, and the drill bit sang a song of retribution. I ran the LMR 400 coax cable, thick, black, and stiff as a frozen garden hose, through the wall, sealing it with silicone and spite. Inside, my desk looked like the command center of a Bond villain who was on a budget but had high aspirations. The Yaesu FT-991A transceiver sat in the center, its LCD screen glowing with a soft, inviting amber light. Next to it was the pièce de résistance, the linear amplifier. The amplifier was a heavy metal box the size of a microwave. It was capable of taking the radio's standard 100 watts of power and boosting it to the legal limit of 1,500 watts. To put that in perspective, a standard Wi-Fi router puts out about 0.1 watts. I was about to unleash a signal 15,000 times more powerful than the thing Brenda used to watch cat videos. I hooked everything up. I grounded the chassis to a copper rod I'd driven into the earth outside, safety first, even in war. I checked the SWR, standing wave ratio, which measures how efficiently the antenna is radiating power. 1.1 to 1. Perfect. The tower was singing. I sat back in my chair, the hum of the amplifier's cooling fan filling the room. It was a low, throaty sound, like a sleeping dragon. "Okay," I whispered. "System operational." I didn't transmit yet. You don't fire the cannon at midnight unless you want to wake the village. No. I needed a target. I needed a specific set of conditions. I needed Brenda's grocery run. Saturday morning arrived with the chirping of birds and the distinct lack of email notifications. I made a pot of coffee, extra strong, and took up my position. My office chair was spun around to face the window. I had a clear line of sight to Brenda's driveway, the tower legs gleaming in the morning sun just a few feet from her fence. Brenda is a creature of habit, a creature of rigid, unyielding routine. 8:00 a.m. Open blinds. 8:15 a.m. Let the dog out, a small, nervous thing that barked at leaves. 9:30 a.m. The grocery run. At 9:28 a.m., the garage door opened. Whir, clunk. It was the sound of my oppression. But today, it was the sound of opportunity. Brenda marched out to her car, a pristine beige sedan that smelled of lavender and judgment. She opened the trunk to put in her reusable bags. She scrutinized every cashier's bagging technique. I was sure of it. She got into the driver's seat. She started the car. She put it in reverse. She backed out slowly, checking her mirrors, probably looking for children to reprimand. Once she was clear of the garage, she reached up to her visor. I knew exactly what she was doing. She was pressing the button on her remote to close the door. Click. The garage door motor engaged. The door started to descend. "Now," I said. I keyed the microphone. CQ, CQ, CQ. This is Kilo November 4, Romeo Delta Delta, calling CQ and standing by. I watched the power meter on the amplifier swing to the right. 1,500 watts of radio frequency energy blasted out of the Yagi antenna, directly overhead. The garage door, which was about 2 feet down, suddenly shuddered. It stopped dead. Then, confused by the overwhelming electromagnetic noise screaming into its receiver, the safety protocol kicked in. It reversed. Whirr, clunk. It went back up. I released the microphone key. The meter dropped to 0. In the driveway, Brenda hit the brakes. I saw her brake lights flare red. She sat there for a second. She grabbed the remote from her visor and mashed the button again. The door started to go down. I pressed the button on my microphone. CQDX, CQDX, Kilo November 4, Romeo Delta Delta, looking for contacts in the Pacific. The invisible wave of energy hit the garage door opener's receiver like a tsunami hitting a rowboat. The receiver went deaf. It couldn't hear her remote. It couldn't hear the keep going signal. It just panicked. The door stopped again. It jerked. It went back up. I released the key. Brenda opened her car door and stepped out. She looked at the garage door. She looked at her remote. She shook the remote, as if the batteries were loose. This is the universal gesture of the confused technological user. If I shake it, the electrons will align. She pointed the remote directly at the sensor and pressed it with both thumbs. The door started down. I waited until it was halfway. This was the cruelty of it. I wanted her to have hope. Kilo November 4. Romeo Delta Delta. Testing high power output on 20 meters. Stop. Reverse. Open. Brenda threw her hands in the air. She actually stomped her foot. I could hear her faint voice through the glass. "Oh, for heaven's sake!" She walked into the garage, hit the wall button, and ran out, tripping over the safety sensor beam on her way out. The door stopped and went back up. She screamed. It was a short, sharp sound. She finally had to walk into the garage, hold the wall button down until the door was fully closed, and then sprint out the side door of the garage before she locked herself in. It took her 4 minutes. I took a sip of coffee. "Science," I said to the empty room. "It works." The real fun began when she came back. An hour later, the beige sedan returned. She pulled into the driveway. She reached for the visor. I was ready. I had found a frequency that was seemingly very popular with a contest in Italy. I needed to make some contacts. CQ contest, CQ contest. Brenda's door didn't even twitch. She pressed the button. Nothing. She pressed it again. Nothing. The RF energy from my tower was effectively creating a shield of noise around her house. Her poor little receiver was being shouted down by my amplifier. She honked her horn. Because, obviously, honking at a garage door makes it open. Finally, she had to get out of the car, unlock her front door, go through the house, into the garage, and open it from the inside. As the door rolled up, I stopped transmitting. She pulled the car in. She got out. She hit the wall button to close it. As the door began to descend, I asked a gentleman in Naples about the weather. The door stopped. It reversed. It stayed open. Brenda stood in her driveway, staring at the open maw of her garage. She looked around. She looked at the sky. She looked at the trees. And then, she looked at the tower. It was a slow realization. A dawning horror. She looked at the shiny aluminum structure. She looked at the antenna pointing, innocently, toward Europe and her roof. She marched to the fence. She looked up at my window. I was there, wearing my headset, looking very professional. "You!" she screamed. "You are doing this!" I slid the window open. "Morning, Brenda." "Doing what?" "You are breaking my house. Your metal thing. It's stopping my door." "Oh, the antenna?" I adjusted my headset. "I'm just doing some testing, Brenda. Calibration. Federal regulations require me to ensure my equipment is operating within parameters. Is something wrong with your door?" "It won't close. Every time you talk on that thing, my door breaks." "That sounds like a shielding issue," I said, channeling my inner tech support agent. "You know, older consumer electronics are very susceptible to front-end overload. They really don't make them like they used to." "Turn it off," she demanded. "I have ice cream melting in the trunk." "I can't just turn it off, Brenda. I'm in the middle of a propagation study. I have a schedule to keep. Maybe you should try manually closing it. There's a red cord." "I am calling the police," she shrieked. "This is harassment. This is cyber warfare." "It's actually electromagnetic compatibility," I corrected. "But sure, call them. Make sure you tell them it's a Part 97 station versus a Part 15 device. They'll need to know that for the report." She pulled out her phone. She didn't dial 911, thankfully, but she definitely dialed the non-emergency line with the ferocity of a woman who demands to speak to the manager of the universe. I closed the window. I went back to my radio. I had about 20 minutes before the cavalry arrived. Time to make a few more contacts in Guam. Officer Miller arrived 25 minutes later. I recognized him. He was the same cop who had responded to the noise complaint when Mike was digging the hole. He looked older today. He looked like he carried the weight of 1,000 suburban disputes on his shoulders. He parked his cruiser in front of Brenda's house. She was waiting for him at the curb, waving her arms like she was landing a plane on an aircraft carrier. I watched them talk. Brenda was pointing at me, pointing at the tower, pointing at her garage. She was pantomiming the door going up and down. Miller listened. He nodded. He wrote something in a small notebook. Then he sighed, hitched up his belt, and walked toward my front door. I met him on the porch. I had prepared a small dossier. I had my license framed. I had a copy of PRB-1. I had a copy of Part 15 of the FCC rules. I was ready for court. "Morning, Officer Miller," I said pleasantly. "Sir?" Miller nodded. "Neighbor says you're hacking her garage?" "Hacking? No, that would be illegal. I'm an amateur radio operator. I'm just broadcasting. She says every time you use your radio, her door goes haywire. She can't close it." "Is that so?" I feigned surprise. "That's interesting. It sounds like her receiver is suffering from desensitization due to near-field RF exposure." Miller stared at me. "In English, please." "Okay," I said, opening my dossier. "Here's the deal. I am a federally licensed station. My call sign is KN4RDD. I am operating on frequencies allocated to me by the U.S. government. My equipment is within legal power limits." I showed him the license. He glanced at it. "Now," I continued, flipping to the page about Part 15 devices. "Her garage door opener is an unlicensed consumer device. It operates under Part 15 of the FCC rules. Here is the text." I pointed to the highlighted paragraph. "This device must not cause harmful interference, and this device must accept any interference received, including interference that may cause undesired operation." Miller read it. He squinted. He read it again. "So," Miller said slowly, looking up at me, "you're saying that if your radio messes up her door, the law says she just has to deal with it?" "Essentially, yes," I said. "Her device is the one failing to reject my signal. I'm not targeting her. I'm just broadcasting. Her opener is just listening too hard. It's a cheap receiver, officer. It can't handle the power of a legal station nearby." Miller looked at the tower. "That thing is huge." "Federally protected," I reminded him. PRB-1. Miller rubbed his face. "Okay, look, I get it. You have the paperwork. But can't you just not do it when she's trying to park?" "I don't know her schedule, officer," I lied. "And propagation, that's how radio waves travel, is best in the mornings. I can't control the sunspots." "Sunspots," Miller repeated. "Right. The thing is, officer," I said, leaning in, "she cut my internet line. Deliberately. I have no other way to communicate with the outside world. This is my lifeline. Surely you wouldn't ask me to cut off my only form of communication just because her garage door is outdated?" Miller looked at Brenda, who was standing on her lawn with her hands on her hips, watching us like a hawk. "She admitted to cutting the line?" Miller asked. "Oh yeah, bragged about it. Said it was ugly." Miller let out a short, snorting laugh. He tried to hide it, but it slipped out. "Okay, I see what's happening here." He turned back to me. "Technically, you aren't breaking any laws." "Technically, and actually no. I am operating a licensed station in accordance with federal regulations." "Right," Miller said. "I'm going to go talk to her." I stayed on the porch. I wanted to hear this. Miller walked back to Brenda. "Well?" Brenda demanded. Is he going to jail? Did you confiscate the machine? Ma'am, Miller said, his voice carrying clearly across the lawn. He's not breaking any laws. What? Brenda screeched. He's blocking my door! He has a license, ma'am, from the FCC. Your garage door opener. Well, the law says it has to accept interference. It's an unlicensed device. He outranks your door. That is ridiculous, Brenda yelled. I pay taxes. I am the HOA treasurer. You're telling me he can just jam my house and I can't do anything? It's not jamming, ma'am, Miller said, clearly enjoying this slightly. It's harmful interference to a Part 15 device. Basically, you need a better garage door opener, or you need to ask him nicely to stop. Ask him nicely? Brenda looked like she was going to explode. He is a menace. He says he's using the radio because his internet is out, Miller said. Something about a cut line? Brenda went silent. Her face turned a blotchy red. If you want to file a civil suit, that's your right, Miller said. But criminally, he's clean. Have a nice day, ma'am. Miller got in his car. He gave me a small wave as he drove off. Brenda stood there. She looked at the officer driving away. She looked at her open garage door. She looked at me. I smiled and gave her a thumbs up. Then I went back inside, sat down, and keyed the mic. CQ, CQ, CQ. Whir clunk. Her door stopped again. The rest of the weekend was a lesson in attrition. Brenda tried everything. She tried waiting me out. She would sit in her car for 10 minutes, waiting for a break in my broadcast. But I had the endurance of a gamer who used to grind for 18 hours straight. I had snacks, I had water, I had a foot pedal for the push to talk, so I could keep my hands free for eating chips. Whenever I saw movement near the garage, I started calling CQ. By Sunday afternoon, Brenda had resorted to parking in the street. This was a violation of HOA bylaws, section 3.4, no overnight street parking. But she was desperate. She tried to manually open the door, but the emergency release cord snapped, probably from overuse or sheer rage. I was winning. But I wasn't just winning, I was educating. I was teaching her that the world was full of invisible lines, invisible forces, and invisible laws that she did not control. However, the war wasn't over. Brenda had one card left to play. Monday morning, I received a letter taped to my front door. It wasn't from the HOA. It was from a law firm. Cease and desist. I opened it. It was full of threatening language about nuisance, loss of enjoyment of property, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. I laughed. A cease and desist is just a lawyer's way of saying, please stop, with a fancy letterhead. It has no legal power. But then the internet guy called. Hey, it's Kevin from Galactic Speed Internet, the voice said. Good news, we had a cancellation. We can get a trenching crew out there tomorrow. Tomorrow? I looked at the calendar. It had been barely a week. I thought you said 3 weeks. Yeah, well, we got a call from your neighbor. A Mrs. Brenda, she actually offered to pay for the expedited service fee. She was screaming, actually. Said she would pay double if we came out today. I paused. Brenda was paying to fix my internet? She said something about getting him back on the damn computer so he stops talking to space people. Kevin laughed. Does that make sense? Kevin, I said, a genuine smile forming. That makes perfect sense. So, we'll be there tomorrow at 8 a.m.? Book it. I hung up. I looked out the window. Brenda was in her yard, glaring at the tower. She looked tired. Her hair was slightly askew. She had lost the battle of the airwaves, and she knew it. She was trying to buy peace. But I wasn't done yet. The internet coming back was great, but I had a tower now, I had a license, and I had a newfound love for the hobby. Plus, I had heard that modern LED light bulbs, the cheap kind Brenda had just installed in her living room, were also very susceptible to RF interference. If I transmitted on the 80-meter band, I bet I could make her reading lamp strobe like a disco ball. I walked out to the backyard. The tower loomed over us. "Hey, Brenda!" I shouted. She whipped around. "What? What do you want?" "Good news! ISP is coming tomorrow. Internet will be back." She slumped. She actually slumped with relief. "Thank God. So you'll take that thing down?" I patted the aluminum leg of the tower. "Take it down? Brenda, this is a permanent installation. I poured concrete. And besides..." I leaned over the fence, grinning. "I'm thinking of getting into satellite tracking. I need to add a dish array, a big one, rotatable. It makes a whirring noise when it tracks the orbit. You'll love it." Brenda's face went pale. "But," I added, "I suppose if the internet is really fast, I might spend less time on the radio. Maybe only weekends." She didn't say a word. She just turned around and walked inside. But she didn't slam the door. She closed it gently. Defeated. I went back inside. I had one more night of silence before the fiber was spliced. One more night to rule the spectrum. I sat down at the radio. I wasn't jamming her garage anymore. She was parked on the street. I tuned the dial. I heard a faint voice through the static. "CQDX, this is VK3, Australia." Australia. I keyed the mic. "VK3, this is KN4RDD. Over." "KN4RDD, I hear you 5 by 9. Loud and clear. What are you running down there, mate?" "Oh, just a humble station," I said, looking out at the massive shadow my tower cast over Brenda's lawn. "But I've got really good motivation." The internet was coming back. The war was winding down. But the tower? The tower was forever. The morning the internet returned was not marked by a choir of angels, but by the beep of a backup alarm on a trenching machine. Galactic Speed Internet sent a crew that looked like a paramilitary strike team. They weren't taking chances. Brenda had apparently called them 4 times between 6 o'clock a.m. and 7 o'clock a.m. to ensure they weren't lost. When they arrived, she was waiting at the curb with a cooler of bottled water and a look of desperate hospitality. She was treating these cable guys like they were the Allied forces liberating Paris. I sat on my front porch, sipping coffee, watching the show. "Over here, right here," Brenda directed, pointing to the easement. "Please dig carefully, but dig fast." The foreman, a guy named Dave, who looked like he'd seen everything, walked over to me. "She says she's paying the expedited fee?" Dave asked, thumbing toward Brenda. "That's what I heard," I smiled. "And she says the neighbor, that's you, is running a pirate radio station that's melting her garage door?" "It's a federally licensed amateur radio station, Dave, totally legal. But yeah, her door doesn't like the 20-meter band." Dave looked up at the 40-foot aluminum tower gleaming in the morning light. He looked at the massive Yagi antenna. He looked back at me. A slow grin spread across his face. "Nice rig. I'm W4 Dave E on the weekends." "KN4RDD, I replied. "Nice. I'll make sure this fiber is buried 3 feet deep. Encased in PVC. She won't cut this one with anything less than a backhoe." "You're a saint, Dave." The repair took 4 hours. They didn't just fix the line. They fortified it. They dug a trench that looked like it was meant for a gas main. They laid the conduit. They pulled the fiber. At 1:00 p.m., my router inside the house went from a blinking red panic to a solid, steady blue. I connected my phone. I ran a speed test. Ping, 4 ms. Download, 980 Mbps. Upload, 940 Mbps. I felt a tear form in my eye. It was beautiful. I was back. The digital world was at my fingertips. I could game, I could stream, I could work. I walked outside. Brenda was standing by the fence, watching the crew pack up. She looked exhausted. Her hair was frizzy. Her spirit was broken. "It's fixed," she said, not looking at me. The man said, "It's fixed." "It is," I confirmed. "Speeds are great. Better than before, actually." She turned to me, her eyes pleading. "So, you'll take it down? The tower?" I looked up at my silver monument, my aluminum Avenger. It stood tall against the blue sky, a permanent reminder of what happens when you cross a man with too much free time and access to federal regulations. "Take it down?" I asked, acting confused. "Why would I do that?" "Because you have the internet," she snapped, her old fire flickering back for a second. "You don't need the radio anymore." "Brenda, Brenda, Brenda," I sighed, leaning against the fence. "You don't just dismantle a station of this magnitude. I've made commitments. I have a schedule. I'm part of a net now. People rely on me." "A net? You mean a fishing net?" "A radio net. A group of operators. We check in. It's vital for atmospheric monitoring." I made that up completely. "Besides, do you know how much concrete is in that base? 3 yards. That thing isn't going anywhere. It's a permanent improvement to the property." She stared at me. Her mouth opened and closed like a fish. "But the garage door—" "Ah," I said. "The garage door." I paused for effect. I let the silence hang there, heavy and thick. "Tell you what," I said, offering a benevolent smile. "Since you were so kind as to pay for the expedited internet repair, which was very neighborly of you, by the way, I will agree to a voluntary ceasefire." "A ceasefire?" "I will limit my high-power transmissions to off-peak hours. I won't broadcast when I see your car in the driveway. Unless, of course." "Unless what?" "Unless the internet goes out again," I said, my voice dropping an octave. "If the fiber gets cut, if the service is interrupted, I'll have no choice. I'll have to go full power, 1,500 watts. Voice, data, Morse code. I'll bounce signals off the moon, Brenda, and your garage door will never open again." She swallowed hard. She looked at the ground where the new fiber was buried. "It won't be cut," she whispered. "I'm putting a planter box over it. A raised bed. No digging." "That sounds lovely," I said. "I look forward to seeing it." The war was technically over, but the peace treaty needed to be ratified. And by ratified, I mean I had to deal with the HOA. 3 days later, the letter arrived. It was on thick, bonded paper. The letterhead was embossed. The Oak Creek Homeowners Association. Board of Directors. Notice of violation. Nature of violation. Unauthorized structure. Antenna in excess of 18 inches. Remedy: immediate removal of structure. Fine: $500 per day of non-compliance. I didn't panic. I didn't get angry. I felt a calm, warm sensation in my chest. It was the feeling of holding a royal flush while the other guy pushes his chips in on a pair of twos. I didn't email them. I didn't call. I showed up at the monthly board meeting that Tuesday night. The meeting was held in the community center basement. There were 5 board members sitting at a folding table. Brenda was there, of course, sitting at the end as the treasurer. When I walked in, she went pale. She whispered something to the president, a guy named Ted, who wore a polo shirt tucked into khaki shorts with a braided leather belt. "Next on the agenda," Ted announced, glaring at me. "Resident hearing regarding the eyesore on Lot 42. I walked to the podium. I was carrying my binder, my Bible of bureaucracy. "State your name and address," Ted said, clicking his pen. "My name is my name, Lot 42, and I'm here to discuss the notice of violation I received regarding my federally protected amateur radio station." "Federally protected?" Ted scoffed. "Son, you signed the CCNRs when you bought the house. No antennas. It's in black and white. You have 24 hours to take that thing down, or we start fining you, and we will put a lien on your house." I placed the binder on the podium. I opened it to the tab marked PRB1. "Actually, Ted," I said, my voice projecting clearly to the dozen or so bored neighbors in the audience, "I'm sure you're familiar with federal preemption, specifically Title 47 of the Code of Federal Regulations, Section 97.15b. Ted blinked. "We have bylaws." "Federal law trumps bylaws, Ted. In 1985, the FCC issued a ruling known as PRB1. It states that local authorities, including HOAs, must reasonably accommodate amateur radio communications. You cannot ban them, and you cannot impose restrictions that make the operation impossible." "We're not banning it," Ted argued, looking unsure. "We're just saying it can't be 40 feet tall and ugly." "To communicate effectively on the 20-meter band," I recited from memory, "an antenna must be at a height of at least half the wavelength. That's roughly 33 feet. My tower is 40 feet. That is the minimum required for effective operation. Therefore, asking me to lower it or remove it is a de facto ban, which is illegal." I pulled out a printed copy of a court case from Virginia where an HOA had to pay a guy $30,000 in legal fees for trying to take down his tower. I slid it across the table to Ted. "This is a precedent," I said. "I have a lawyer on retainer who specializes in FCC litigation. He's very expensive, and under the law, if I sue you to protect my federal rights, the HOA, meaning you and all these nice neighbors, will be liable for the costs." The room went silent. The other neighbors looked at Ted. They looked at their wallets. "Is this true?" a lady in the front row asked. "We have to pay for his lawyer?" "If you lose," I said cheerfully. "And you will lose. The FCC doesn't like it when HOAs mess with their licensees. I'm part of the National Emergency Response Network now." I wasn't, but I could be. Ted looked at the paper. He looked at Brenda. "Brenda?" Ted asked. "Did you know about this?" Brenda looked down at her notepad. "Officer Miller mentioned something about federal rules." Ted's face turned a shade of purple, usually reserved for bruised plums. He realized he had been led into a trap. He realized that fighting this tower was going to drain the HOA's reserve fund, the fund meant for the new pool furniture. We will take this under advisement," Ted muttered. "Great," I said. "In the meantime, the tower stays. Oh, and I'll be adding a small weather station to the top. For safety. Have a good night." I walked out of that basement like I had just dropped the mic at Madison Square Garden. Life returned to normal, or at least a new version of normal. My internet was fast. My ping was low. I climbed back up the rankings in my game, fueled by the satisfaction of total victory. But the dynamic of the neighborhood had shifted. The tower stood there, vigilant. It became a landmark. "Turn left at the big metal spire," people would say. Brenda never pruned my side of the property line again. In fact, she planted a row of tall, thick arbor vitae trees on her side of the fence. She wanted to block the view of the tower. I didn't mind. They provided excellent sound dampening. We developed a silent understanding, Brenda and I. When I saw her in the driveway, I would wave. She would give me a stiff, curt nod. It wasn't friendly, but it was respectful. It was the nod two generals give each other after a peace treaty is signed. She knew I had the nuclear option, the amplifier. I knew she had the checkbook to fix the internet. One Saturday afternoon, about a month later, I was out in the yard mowing the grass. Big Mike had come back and removed the excess dirt, and the grass had finally grown back over the scar of the trench. I stopped the mower to wipe my brow. Brenda was in her garden. She was staring at the tower. "It's not rusting," she said. It was the first time she had spoken to me in weeks. "Aluminum," I shouted over the idling mower. "Aircraft grade. Won't rust for 100 years. She sighed. "It interferes with the baby monitor, you know. My granddaughter was over. We heard weird noises." "That wasn't me," I said honestly. "I haven't transmitted in 3 days. That's probably the Chinese baby monitor using a cheap frequency. You should upgrade to a 5 GHz model. Less interference." She looked at me. For a second, I thought she was going to snap. I thought she was going to scream about the aesthetic, about the property value, about the sheer audacity of the metal giant casting a shadow on her hydrangeas. But she didn't. She just looked at her garage door. "I bought a new opener," she said quietly. "A smart one. Wi-Fi enabled. Shielded." "That's a smart move, Brenda," I said. "Very proactive." "Does that mean—" She hesitated. "Does that mean it will work? Even if you broadcast?" "It should," I said. "Those new units operate on 900 megahertz. My equipment shouldn't touch it. You're safe." She let out a breath she seemed to have been holding for a month. "Good. That's good." She went back to her weeding. I finished mowing the lawn. I put the mower away. I walked into my office and sat down at the desk. The Yaesu FT991A was dark. I hadn't turned it on in a while. The fiber internet was just too good. But I reached out and flipped the switch. The amber screen glowed to life. The static hiss filled the room. I didn't need to transmit. I didn't need to jam her door. I didn't need to fight. But as I looked out the window at the setting sun reflecting off the 40-foot symbol of my pettiness, I keyed the mic just for a second. "KN4RDD, clear," I whispered. I watched the needle on the power meter jump. Just a little. Outside, I saw Brenda's new smart garage door pause for a fraction of a second as she pulled in, then continue smoothly. She looked up at my window. I raised my coffee mug. She shook her head, the garage door closing behind her, sealing her into her fortress of solitude. I had my internet. She had her flowers. And we both had the knowledge that in the suburbs, peace isn't given. It's forged in the fires of bureaucracy, secured by high-tensile steel, and maintained by the threat of 1,500 watts of pure, unadulterated noise. I spun my chair around and queued up for another match. "Game on," I said.